7?
7 is still good.
Okay, and 27 articles in print. One of the articles has been cited by the U.S. Supreme Court and 11 of the 13 U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeals. With that, please help me welcome David T. Hardy. Yes,
Maybe switch back to that one. My mic live? We're using the microphones come up from the webcam. Right here. Got involved in Waco way back. It was sort of unusual. I started off with some Freedom of Information Act requests because I felt pretty good about those, and started getting some stuff from the government. And then they started stonewalling me, which actually a federal district judge had called it just that. And to give you some idea, one of the first things I got was an investigation report. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, which enforces the federal gun laws, was looking at the Davidians in Waco. And they had the agency established what today is called the Undercover House. It was a rented house across the road from the Davidians. And they were supposed to monitor the Davidians. And the official version was that they could not arrest David Koresh peacefully because he never left the compound and was a paranoid recluse, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm looking at an investigation report from the guys in the Undercover House 9 days before the big shootout, in which they mentioned how they spent the day. They went shooting with David Koresh. No kidding. I'm saying, what? According to their report, they went over there. They had some AR-15s. They went over. There's a big empty space behind the Davidian place. Knocked on the door, asked, "Do you mind if we go shooting on your land?" And David Koresh himself came down and said, "I got a bunch of ammunition for AR-15s. Let's go out together." So they all got in the field. David Koresh is carrying the ammunition. He was totally unarmed until one of the agents, Rodriguez, I believe it was, loaned his 38 Super to Koresh so he could shoot, because it wouldn't be polite to shoot all the guy's ammunition and not let him have a gun. And then they got the gun back and they went back to climbing the raid. So I'm reading this going, what the? And one of the things that had become apparent when I first heard of the raid, because I was a GS-14 bureaucrat for a while. I represented a minor federal agency that wanted to work its way up in the world. So I know how they work. And my comment was, when does their House appropriations cycle start? The answer was 10 days after the raid. Because just like the agency I represented, you've got your appropriation cycle, which starts on the House side. So you always schedule a big publicity-grabbing raid during the last 2 weeks before your first House appropriations hearing. Then your boss gets up and says, typical, which isn't, of the work our agents do is this wonderful case here. I've represented U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, so the cases got pretty weird. But they always did it this way. I don't know if anybody ever listened to an undercover lizard sting going down. I actually did that. A whole bunch of them. Atlanta Wildlife Exchange. It was like a whole bunch of them. Atlanta Wildlife Exchange. It was like practicing law in a Far Side cartoon. He's past the top, move in, boys. Anyway, so I figured that was it. And when I checked into it, I found all that checked out because the agents testified during the criminal trial as to what arms they took in. And the answer was clearly they weren't expecting a fight. Because one guy testified he had a submachine gun and the only ammo he had for it was one 20-round magazine in the gun. That was it. This is not something you take to a firefight. Another guy had a submachine gun and one spare magazine. Nobody anticipated there was going to be a big fight. They would come up, they would have the helicopters buzz the place, all the stuff that would grab publicity, and then they go storming in and take everybody out and book them, and the U.S. Attorney has a wonderful press conference. That's it. They didn't expect anything to happen, and it did. But actually, it came pretty close to not happening, because as we reconstructed the events, it looks like the agents pull up in front of the building. Their mode of approach was 2 cattle trailers with the agents packed in. Then they would come running out to the front. And it looks like at that moment, David Koresh came out of the building waving his hands and saying, "There are women and children in here, don't fire." And it could have been peacefully resolved, but something happened at the back of the building. There were gunshots. And picture, they're running up to the building. Or if you're inside, you're seeing them running at you. Everybody's armed to the teeth. Your instinctive thought is that the first bullet's going to hit me. So, I mean, you've got your adrenaline pumped through the roof, and in the middle of that, all it takes is one shot, and everybody empties their magazine, which was exactly what happened. As part of the Freedom of Information stuff, I also got 911 calls, because the Davidians called 911 to ask for help. One of them was their attorney, Wayne, now I forget his last name. He got killed in the fire. And he's calling up 911, Waco 911, and screaming, telling them to stop shooting. There's 75 men around our building and they're shooting at us. There are women and children in here. And finally they got it set up, and the ATF had no way for the local sheriff to contact them. So in the end, the local sheriff found a guy who was a university policeman for a local college there. And he could talk to the university policeman. So the university policeman drove on over to where the ATF agents were, and now they finally had a way of contacting everybody back off, stop shooting, etc. And I eventually reconstructed all of that. But it was pretty interesting from that point on. And what happened thereafter, I heard reports, I could never run the ground, that they brought in the FBI hostage rescue team. And, everybody's, like I say, they're pumped full of adrenaline at that point. And somebody mouthed off, and they had a heck of a brawl in the hotel between the ATF and FBI. They said all it takes is one guy mouthing off, and everybody piles in with their fists. Anyway, the whole thing was set up around the idea of the big raid that will serve our purposes. I got videotapes of the inside of the raid headquarters on the morning of the raid. People were reading the newspaper, goofing off, taking souvenir photos of each other. These are not tense people. These are not people who expect a big battle.
I got a question that bothered me all the time, and you may not want to answer it. But I've always heard that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms gets the C and D students out of the Federal Law Enforcement Academy. Is that true?
I've heard the same. I mean, basically, if you want to go to federal law enforcement, where do you go? Well, first choice is the FBI. Mm-hmm. If you can't get in there, look in the Secret Service. If that's no luck, then you're looking at the smaller agencies, DEA, and so on. And really, by the time you get down to ATF, you're pretty much at the bottom. And I can tell you from having looked into them over the years, there's some agents out there who, they aren't quite put together up here. I mean, there was weird stuff that I looked into with, this can't be true. Yeah, somebody else reports the same guy doing the same thing. So, but yeah, they don't get the best. And these ones, one of the guys who was middle-level leadership told someone who told me that he said he was just happy that he wasn't the guy who had made the decision to go ahead with the raid. Because if anyone called off the raid, basically the career was gone. And what happened on that morning is that one agent, David Rodriguez, who had essentially infiltrated Mount Carmel and became pretty good buddies with David Koresh. And they actually liked each other. And Rodriguez went over there the morning of the raid with instructions to find out if there's anything wrong, if they know we're coming, etc. And right in front of him, David Koresh got the phone call saying, hey, they're coming. And he came out and looked at Robert and just said, you got to do what you got to do. And let them go. So Robert goes back to the undercover house, calls the top dogs on the raid and says, basically, they know you're coming. And the top dogs said, go ahead with it anyway. Because they knew, as one guy had said to a friend, whoever stops the raid will have his career ruined. This was, the joke about it internally was it was ZBO, Z Big One. And that was going to be the biggest thing of the year. And if you're the guy who blew it, well, guess what happens to your career? So they decided to go ahead, and the other thing, they had 3 helicopters that were going to sweep into the back to distract everyone in the building. And there's some question about whether shots were fired from the helicopters or not. I think there were, but no one's ever admitted it. So I can't say it's 100%. The helicopters came sweeping in, and the funny part, I also found out once I got the radio through the Freedom of Information Act request, I got the radio transmissions. The helicopters screwed up. They were off in the distance. They got too low. The agents' walkie-talkies were very high frequency or ultra high frequency. Well, that's line of sight. You can't pick up a signal over the horizon. Once the helicopters got below the horizon, nobody could talk to them among the ATF. And so they're screaming, literally the ATF on the scene is literally screaming, bring the helicopters in. And they didn't get there in time. But anyway, then they eventually came sweeping in. Now, what use is a helicopter? I think the answer is basically one, publicity. I mean, it's really dramatic, isn't it? Even if they don't land or do anything. But also, too, they got them for free. There's the Posse Comitatus statute at the federal level. They made an exception for the war on drugs, which was if a civilian agency can call upon military equipment and operators of equipment to help them. But if it's not involved in the war on drugs, you have to reimburse the military. If it's involved in the war on drugs, it's free. So they cooked up this thing and told the military that they thought the Davidians were cooking meth. Well, the fact of the matter is that like 10 years before the Davidians, this branch of the Davidians took over the building, Mount Carmel, there had been a separate building which had been leased to some people, and apparently they were cooking meth and got caught. Well, since then, the building had been torn down. So not only has that nothing to do with these Davidians, the building doesn't even exist anymore. But it was good enough to tell the military, this is part of the war on drugs, so let's see, we'd like those helicopters, thank you. And I discovered that continued even after the FBI took over. I mean, the FBI was getting everything off the military, down to pre-filled sandbags, so they didn't have to fill them. The military vehicles, of course, night vision devices, you name it, they got it for free. And eventually the military figured out what was going on and started demanding repayment. And after ATF balked, finally someone in the military wrote a memo that I read, which was something, a polite hint that this may come out in congressional hearings, called a shot across the bow. You're not making an overt threat, you're merely observing what might happen. Anyway, they paid up. And then they went into the siege, the 51 days. And I think it's fair to say that at every level, everything that could be screwed up was screwed up. You had the negotiators out there, and they were fundamentally taking the wrong approach. The action guys, I mean, this is their equivalent of Delta Force, a hostage rescue team. The personality that you get with that sort of thing is somebody that you might be interested in if you, in fact, were a hostage, namely a guy with way too much adrenaline and testosterone who really lives for action. And now these guys are sitting out there for 51 days in the rain looking at this building. So they started getting fed up. And at the end, they finally presented a plan to Jeanette Reno. And you read it over here, they're pushing her hot buttons. They know she has certain things that motivate her. And so they're pushing her. No, there's no hope of the siege ending in the foreseeable future. Yes, Koresh is still beating up little kids. BS had gotten shot through the pelvis. I mean, he was pretty messed up. And that sort of thing. Pushed all of her buttons and then said, we'll just inject a little tear gas. But if they fire on us, we can do whatever we want. And of course, at some point, presto, somebody says, they're firing at us, compromise. And at that point, they just start pumping the place full of tear gas. And the tear gas is an intensely irritating substance. It's actually a powder, not a gas. And the other problems it has is it was sprayed in as a liquid dissolved in methylene chloride. Well, methylene chloride is toxic. I don't know if they banned it, but they were seriously considering banning it just because it can kill you. It makes a great paint stripper.
It also turns to cyanide when it's lit.
Yeah. Oh, that's the tear gas.
CS was already banned in the military, so you can't use it at that time.
Yeah. It was a witch's brew. The CS, when it burns, creates hydrogen cyanide. The methylene chloride, when inhaled, creates carbon monoxide in the body at a very high rate of return, which is why it killed somebody, which was why they were looking at banning it. If you're going to be in a fire, you don't want to already have your carbon monoxide level jerk through the roof, and the cyanide won't do you much good on you. So they basically just pumped the place full of it. And I knew some of the things that we're using were called ferric cartridges, which is in this case, 40 millimeter cartridge. It's basically a high-tech water balloon. It's a plastic thing, and when it hits a window or anything, it bursts open.